I'm Michael Wunsch. I'm the plant pathologist at the Carrington Research Center. And one of the diseases that we work on the very most is Sclerotina head rot. We do an enormous amount of Sclerotina head rot research, and we've been doing this for the duration of the time that I've been in Carrington, which is now since 2010. So today I'm going to talk about 4 different subjects very, very briefly. I understand this will be recorded and you can view it again afterwards. So you can look at the details on the slides afterwards by reviewing this if you're interested in details. We're going to talk about the susceptibility of sunflowers to Sclerotina head rot relative to growth stage. We're going to talk about the susceptibility of the differences in susceptibility across commercial hybrids to this disease. We're going to talk a little bit about using fungicides. Can we use fungicides to manage this disease? And finally, we're going to be talking about some research that's in progress, not completed yet, but looks very promising in using honeybees actually to carry a biological control agent for management of head rot in sunflowers. So first off, we need to talk about the susceptibility of sunflowers relative to growth stage. This is important so that you know when your crop is at risk. The general assumption is that you need 24 hours of moisture, sustained moisture on that head to get the spores to actually cause disease. And that pretty well corresponds with my experience. I don't think you need quite 24 hours, probably 18 or so. But anyhow, how much disease you get is very dependent on the growth stage at which those conditions occur. So here we did inoculation studies, and you can see that the susceptibility increased as bloom increased, and then it dropped sharply at R6. Okay. That was in confection sunflowers. Here in oil seeds, you see the same pattern almost always, except you'll see there were 2 studies conducted in 2014 in Carrington where the pattern was opposite. Well, in that case, it was really cool and wet when the sunflowers were in the first third of bloom, and then it got hot and dry. Okay, so the environment also matters, but on balance, you know, susceptibility increases as bloom progresses. Just to be very rigorous, we tested this also with various fungal individual strains of Sclerotina sclerotiorum, okay, and these are all laboratory produced spores. And what you can see here is that irrespective of the strain that we used, the sunflowers were way more susceptible to R5 than R6, although at least one of these strains could cause some disease at R6. But once those disc flowers are fully ended in bloom and the ray flowers are wilting, susceptibility drops sharply. All right, and so anyhow, susceptibility increases as bloom progresses, and it drops sharply at R6. You really have to have extraordinarily favorable conditions to get head rot at R6. And you know, if you see the disease developing at R7, well, the infection occurred earlier. Okay. Now we're going to talk about hybrids. These are oilseed hybrids that we screened in Carrington in 2015, and everything shaded in yellow was a commercial hybrid at that time. What you can see here is that there are huge differences in susceptibility to head rot across commercial oilseed hybrids. That said, if you end up with one of these best hybrids on a really bad year, you're still not going to be happy. I mean, 18 to 37 or percent incidence of head rot is not good. All right, but on a year that's not quite as disastrous for head rot, you can come out quite well with these more resistant hybrids. Okay, more data from another year illustrating the exact same thing, that there are big differences in susceptibility, but the partial resistance is not enough on its own in a year that's highly favorable for head rot. Okay, and more data showing the exact same thing. Again, enormous differences in susceptibility across commercial hybrids. Everything shaded in yellow is a commercial hybrid. And, but again, you do not have full resistance, even in the best lines, okay? So, you know, those best lines are going to save your day on one of those years where it's moderate, where you have moderate disease pressure. But if it's a train wreck type of year, you're still going to have quite a bit of head rot out there. I mean, you might still have a crop. which is a difference from the other hybrids. Now, it's a little hard to find these hybrids, though. A lot of the companies just don't have the money or the time to do really rigorous testing of the relative susceptibility. But you know, if you ask around, hopefully you can, your salespeople can point you to one of these hybrids that is less susceptible or reduce your risk. Okay, now the big question is always, are fungicides useful? Now, we did tons of testing with fungicides for many years, and these were enormous trials. Here you can see a 13-acre field all set up with sprinklers to facilitate head rot. Those are all driving passes for our tractor-based sprayer. And yeah, that was a fun hobby that summer. We did applications with drop nozzles and with boom mounted nozzles. And the drop nozzles were just to see if we can get control any way at all, you know. And so I don't have time to go through all of our results. We tested at different different growth stages. We tested we tested with different intervals. When we challenged the plant with Sclerotina, i.e. we sprayed the fungicide and either inoculated the sunflowers 1 day after, or 3 days after, or 5 days after, or 7 days after, okay? And we tested different nozzle types, we tested different adjuvants. But anyhow, on sum total, when we applied Proline with boom-mounted nozzles, and the disease incidence at the end of the season was less than 30%, we generally got a slight reduction in head rot from Proline, okay? And likewise, we would very consistently see a yield response as long as that incidence of head rot was below about 35%. Okay, so again, when disease pressure was low to moderate, we got some degree of control out of that Proline, and we got yield gains. Once the disease pressure got really high, the fungicide was overwhelmed and didn't do anything at all. Okay, but let me tell you again, this is not a lot of control. Okay, if you go from 30% incidence down to 26% incidence, you're not going to be very happy. Okay, that's the truth of it. Okay, so this is not very good control. And with drop nozzles, we got better control. Okay, and that's not very realistic. We were just trying to see what we could make work. Okay, but I want to warn you. Again, I told you don't get very good control. And we tested how long we'd get activity after we applied the fungicide. Well, here you have the days after the fungicide were applied that we inoculated the sunflowers. And on the vertical axis, you see how much disease control we got. Well, you can see we only got consistent disease control, or relatively consistent disease control, when we challenged the sunflowers 1 day after we sprayed the fungicide, which means you have about 24 hours of residual activity. Okay, at 2 to 3 days, we had mixed results. Okay, so maybe you get up to about 3 days residual at the best case scenario. Okay, this is not good. Okay, basically, if the cool wet weather is ready to come in, you spray right ahead of time, and maybe you get a tiny bit of control. Okay, what about Endura? With Endura, we again had some degree of efficacy under 30%, but a lot less. Okay, and under 30% incidence in the non-treated control. Okay, and the drop nozzles again with Endura were less effective. So basically, Proline performed better than Endura. Okay, and this is not surprising. You know, that's true on canola. Okay, and the fungicide that's best is often dependent on the crop. Okay, and so anyhow, again, you don't get much control out of fungicides. When you do get it, the residual activity is very short, and you only get it when the disease pressure is low to moderate. Okay, and now if you're applying with boom mounted nozzles or with an airplane, you know, you have to get coverage to the front of that head. And as those heads begin to drop, it gets harder to get that coverage. With drop nozzles, we could continue to get coverage even as the heads drop, but not with boom mounted nozzles, which are our best approximation of what you might get it with an airplane, right? And so anyhow, you can see now, as you go from R5.0 to R5.3, there we were getting decent coverage with boom mounted nozzles, but after that, no. Okay, and so obviously earlier in bloom, you have a better chance of getting coverage to your target. You have to get the fungicide to the front of the head to get any control. All right, so these are my conclusions. We got a little bit of a little bit of activity out of proline when disease pressure was low to moderate, but residual activity was very short. You're looking at 1 to 3 days in most cases. And, you know, you're probably only going to get decent coverage in the first, you know, kind of an R5.0 to R5.5. And Endura was less effective. And most of the yield gain, frankly, was due to control of other diseases, rust, phomopsis, you know, phoma, just other diseases. All right, so now BVectoring. Okay, this is a new approach that we've been testing for trying to control head rot in sunflowers. And what this involves is actually attaching a dispenser to the exit of a beehive, of the beehives. And this dispenser dispenses a biological control agent that the bees then have to walk through. Okay, these dispensers have really improved. The company's improved their design, and we really only have to refill them about once a week now, unless it rains. If it rains, the product will gum up on the exit, and you have to clean that out. Okay, so any rate, we started out with Venkat up in Langdon, and he did basically the equivalent of a strip trial with 1 block of sunflowers on one side of a tree row and 1 block from the other side. Both managed the same way, but not replicated, right? He used bumblebees in this case because they don't fly quite as far. And he saw some pretty decent control, okay? Again, like a strip tie, not replicated. All right, and we then followed up with that with by using pollinator exclusion bags. These are bags that breeders use to facilitate crosses and to run replicated studies. And again, we saw good control. Okay, really quite impressive control. So we followed up with that with these big giant strip trials the last 2 years. We want to know how far away from the hive we're getting control. And you can see in Carrington, these 2 Foster County sites, one was on farm, one was at the research center, we got excellent control. Now, we put a hive at the end of a half-mile strip and then 2/3 of the way down the strip so that we'd end up with 3 800-foot distances away from the hive approximately. Okay, and each, what I'm calling a hive, is a pallet with actually 4 hives on it. Now, in our sites down in Foster County, every one of those hives had a dispenser. Up in Cavalier County, Venkat only had a dispenser on 1 of the 4, i.e. 3/4 of the bees didn't have biological. What you can see is he got less control. Okay, obviously it was a little bit more washed out. The big important thing is that we didn't see a decline in efficacy from the hive. Okay, and we saw a yield bump from this. And the biggest, most important thing is we dropped our sclerosis contamination in the grain below that critical 4% by weight. These are confection, non-oil sunflowers, and you know if you're at 4% or higher, you've lost your market. You know, you don't make grade. We did this again in 2021. This was a drought year, and we actually set up sprinklers on these strips and pumped water through the sprinklers to try to create conditions favorable for head rot, and we made it, right? So you can see here again, we got very good control with the bees, okay? And that at least in our sites in Foster and Wells County, i.e. close to Carrington, we had no decline in efficacy from as a distance from the hive. Up in Cavalier County, this experiment was conducted on the edge of basically a quarter section of sunflowers, almost a quarter section. And basically those bees were going every which direction. And there we actually saw a drop off, okay? So, I mean, if you're trying to do this over a quarter section of sunflowers, you're gonna need more than 2 pallets, more than, you know, 8 hives. So that's the take home, right? Again, you can see beautiful reductions in that sclerosis contamination of the grain, which is really our target in these confection sunflowers. Yeah, we get yield bumps too, but we want to make grade, okay? We did this in Carrington with 6 different hybrids. And what you can see is that that Foster County site, without the bees, only 4 of those 6 hybrids made grade, i.e. only 4 of the 6 hybrids were below 4% sclerosis contamination of the grain. At our Wells County on-farm site, so basically in Foster County, we went from 4 to all 6 of the hybrids that made grade when we used the bees. Okay, at the Wells County site, we went from, what is it? It's just 1 of the hybrids that made grade without the bees to 4 of them making grade, or 3 or 4, because 1 of them was right at 4%. So anyhow, definitely very promising. I would give you a caveat that these are not good relative susceptibility data. Okay, we did not manage the study in a way to actually assess relative susceptibility of sunflowers to head rot. We couldn't do that with this type of study. We couldn't have that type of sprinkler system. We didn't have wells there. Okay, we had to haul water to the site. And so, at any rate, this is just how these sunflowers perform relative to the conditions when they enter bloom, period. Okay, and the big thing I want to give you a caveat on is that this is research in progress. The one thing we need to test is we need to make sure that that those bags that we're putting over the heads are not trapping more humidity and just causing more head rot. Okay, and we ran a preliminary study looking at this year, and we saw a slight bump of head rot with the bags. Not as much as we were seeing in our studies, not nearly as much. Okay, but a slight bump. But I really want to give you a caveat. We need to do this more. Okay, this coming year we're going to really look at this rigorously, because if you look at these by rep data, I mean, it's just all over the place. I've learned the hard way, I mean, through many years of doing head rot research, that you need 80 to 100 plants per plot. And we've been doing our fungicide work that way. We've been doing our BVectoring work that way. But I didn't have enough bags to do this bag head study that way. So I tried to cheat and only do like 34 plants per plot, and it's not enough plants, okay? And you get a lot of noise. And so we really don't know what the impact of the bags are yet. I can tell you from previous experience of working with bags to facilitate, in this case, trying to facilitate disease, we never got much of a bump of disease by bagging heads. Okay, and these bags are perforated. They allow airflow and humidity flow. They are not, it's not like putting a Walmart bag over the head. Okay, these are perforated bags that allow moisture and airflow. So anyhow, very promising results. I do believe that this strategy, combined with a partially resistant hybrid, is really promising. Again, stack two partial controls. Okay, the BVectoring is giving us about 50% control. A partially resistant hybrid will get, and oil seeds will give you about 50% control, and a confection will give you maybe 20 or 30% control. And so you stack those two, and I think there we have potential. We do need to do this research one more year to finalize our recommendations, though.